So just to tell you a little bit about Comber, we have different strands. We're all doing community-based educational research in diverse contexts. We have lifelong learning and development communities, which is very much the strand that I kind of lead, and that's kind of people who come in and they're not got another specific focus, one of the other foci, but they're doing like self-study. Marina Mayer is an arts education. We've now had about 10 people from language education join there, and they've been there for a year, and they're looking at perhaps developing their own strand now. We've got people in IT, we've got people in academic support, we other places, that, and that's a kind of, to me, it's an incubating area. And then we have people in environmental education, early childhood education, because we now have a chair in that, and that is growing really, really big. Inclusive education and support services, and holistic well-being in communities. And Harper has grown from maybe about 10 of us, and only really research coming from myself and our extraordinary professors, and and we have a wonderful other extraordinary professor who's a B-rated researcher, Professor who is South African in inclusive education, to 60 members, some about 5 extraordinary professors, some postdocs, but the rest actually involved in doing research in higher education within Comber, which I think just shows us not how great I am at setting up an entity, but how much attraction and value this type of research holds for people. I think the time is right now, and people are actually struggling, and they're finding they can do research now, as all of us know. Once you start doing actual research, you think, why did I ever do anything else? And it's so satisfying, and it's bringing about change. And when we talk about community, it can be the community out there. And in South Africa, there's a tendency to think when we talk about community, it's pure Black people. It's not the case always. You can work with teachers in school. You can work with your colleagues within the university. It's any goal that has any community that has a shared goal, and they want to work together to improve their own quality of life, their own professional practice, and so on. So that's, and Marinda is in early childhood development in communities now, but she does inclusive education. So the strands are not distinct. They also intertwine. This is for theoretical, forgetting the evaluation panel. We have to do these kinds of diagrams, which all really work together. So now, community-based research with vulnerable populations. This is sort of outcome of the NRF project. It's just basically the funding is just still carrying on. And when I talk about vulnerable populations, it's not like a sort of those poor people. They're very vulnerable. It's not something from their own doing. It's due to systemic oppression, and we all know what kind of systemic oppression has been going on for years and years and years in South Africa. First colonialism, then apartheid, and then in the last 10 the years of freedom years, huge corruption and collapse of infrastructure and so on. So these people are the educational and societal divide and the economic divide is getting larger and larger. Those of us, and we're not just predominantly white people now, also many of all national population groups belong to both sectors, the poorer and the more privileged, and but that divide is getting bigger and bigger, and it's very scary. So community-based research, as I define it, is research that can democratize knowledge to make it more relevant and accessible to all. And the goal is social change. We want to emancipate colonialized thinking about power, about privilege, about participation. And we want to combine the theoretical knowledge with the knowledge of those actually living and experiencing the circumstances and consequences of social inequality to construct knowledge for change. And higher education in South Africa has a mandate for community engagement. It's supposed to be it's the third pillar, with teaching and learning being another one, and research being another one. So I think that tends to create the silo approach, where community engagement is, oh, go and volunteer in a children's home or something. So we are trying to create a more engaged scholarship where everything is done, whatever we do, it's a research project, and it's also feeding into our teaching and learning. And it's got to have practical change, so engaged scholarship. And so this is the latest book. And I mean, there's a lot of articles out there that you can read about this sort of thing, and the frameworks that we're generating. And I think Mary and I wrote about 4 of them together that you can look at. Just a little bit of the paradigmatic assumptions of CBR. Because I think that's the biggest shift. All of us here are action researchers, so we don't really need to make that shift, but people who are not action researchers really struggle to make that shift. So it's a participative reality. We understand reality through experiences of people in relation with each other. We cannot do that without dialogue, critical reflexivity, and so on. We create knowledge through sharing experiences, researchers, students, the community. I mean, we need to listen to our students. They have a lot to teach us as well. And our methodology is a collaborative inquiry with a focus on action, but self-awareness as well is a starting point. And the aim, of course, is to transformation towards a social justice practice. We are combining theory and action. We're celebrating diversity. We're saying that we're part of a bigger picture. And how we can contribute, each of us, and as a group, collectively, personally and professionally, to a more inclusive, democratic, peaceful society. And I think, okay, that's a great ideal. It sounds like Miss World when you say to them, what do you bring? What change? Oh, yes, I want to bring world peace. Yeah, but we do have these ideals. We are values driven. And we just have to keep on working towards them, even though it seems the world is collapsing around us. So people have told me it's quite idealistic, but I think if you don't have ideals, where do you go? So it's moving from individual reflection, which is very, very important, but towards collective meaning making, because in the end, we live and we work with others. Even as a teacher, you work in teams now. Community is a practice. Our Department of Basic Education said teachers must work in communities of practice. We can do self-study in the classroom, but if we don't share it with others, does it really help that as much as it could? It does help as much as it could. So some of the questions we need to reflect on, and I don't know if we've got time, maybe you could put some answers to these in the chat for yourself if you reflect on this, about why do we need an alternative approach? Or maybe one person could just quickly answer that in one sentence. An alternative approach, meaning not just carry on doing research to make recommendations and to sit in the library. I'm going to ask somebody then. Cornelia, it's why do we need to do action research? Why do we need this alternative approach? Particularly within the world the way it is now. And it's not just South Africa where there's a growing economic divide, it's all over the world.
Yeah, well, no, and particularly it's hugely evident and it's hugely important within the university sector now, and indeed within industry, in terms of being conscious about diversity and equity for everyone. And really it's only through our practice and through our reflection that that we can change and that we can influence others. And actually, as you were going through your presentation, what I was even thinking of was my PhD students, how some of their studies actually kind of sit on, like, I'm going to say that a bottom little point of your whole model, but I loved actually what you were saying there about the community, because the community can be different in different contexts.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we use the word community, we think of this huge environment, but the community could be just the school community, for example, or even. a maths department within a school. You know, so thinking of it that way.
And as Margaret Mead says, I think, you know, you can change the world. Don't say you can't change the world in small communities. You have to start with yourself. I don't know if Margaret Mead, something like that. So thank you, Cornelia. I'm also conscious of time. I've got 10 minutes left. So I will, you know, I think those questions, it's so important. If you don't reflect on your own positionality, why am I doing, I always say in my CBR course to people who are on it, if you don't care, if you don't hold the values dear to you that you want to bring a difference, quite happily, you know, you can leave. I don't advise you to do this course. I'll say to my students, please don't do action research unless you really care about social justice and about bringing change, because otherwise it's not going to work, and it won't be authentic. And so the starting point is for researchers to critically reflect on their own worldviews and behavior and how they are affecting the process. Okay, so let's look at the PALA process. You can, that bit of the scholarly project, this comes on my book. This is just the sort of what the researcher is doing while in a scholarly way. So this came out of my book. You can ignore that for today. But we always start with building relationship. We have to craft a collaborative, it's a type of vision. We have to work with people and say, this is a PALA process that I showed you earlier on, but we have adapted it now for working with vulnerable communities. Defining a mutual purpose, making sure people know who they are, creating self-awareness, and why are we here, and why do we want to do this? What are our values? Why are we even interested in this? And then we have to look at what do we each bring, helping people who have been told they're actually, you know, don't know anything or can't do anything to change their life, that they have assets. We have huge community assets. We're working with unemployed youth now. We have a huge problem. 65% kids coming out of school just sitting around, not in employment, education, or further training. And we've got a huge university-wide project that I'm leading, working on that now. First thing we start with is, what assets do you have? We're using those kids, helping them to find their assets, mobilizing them to lead community change within their peers in the communities that they're coming from. And but also, what do we need to learn in order to reach our vision? Because often they don't have the communication skills. They come out of school with the school leavers, what we call a matriculation, but they have no self-confidence. They're taught to pass the test and they scrape through exams, but their education has been woeful. And then, I mean, how do we negotiate roles and responsibilities so that we're all participating? And they're very important. What context are we working in? Who can help us? In South Africa, especially if you're working in townships and rural communities, there's so much politics going on there, and people you have to include, otherwise your project will fall flat, and so on. So context analysis is very important. And then, okay, what are our broad goals? What do we want to do here? And then, very importantly, and maybe I want to change this wording, it's not negotiating an ethical contract. It's not a legal thing, but it's negotiating a social compact. But how are we going to work together? What do we each want out of that? If we don't negotiate that up front, it can fall apart halfway. We have to say we want access to the data we generate. That's our job. But what do you want? What change do you want to bring about? How can we mobilize our resources as well to help you reach that? And only then do we move on to what we all know, the action research cycle of going through critical, planning, acting, reflecting, observing, deciding on the next steps, and so on.